is being recorded.
Okay, welcome along everybody. This is the first in a series of webinars that SEJ will be doing. I'm delighted that Paul Lomax has agreed to be our speaker for this evening. Paul has a lot of expertise in transport, and we're talking about the way that the technology used has underestimated the amount of traffic that has been relocated from low traffic neighborhoods, our LTNs, onto surrounding roads. And with that, I'll hand over to Paul. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So just wanted to start off by explaining this little diagram. This is from O-level or GCSE science, for those who might remember. And it shows the water cycle where you have evaporation, becoming condensation, and then precipitating. And this is a diagram I used, I think, when I first got involved in the LTN debate on Twitter, to ask the question, well, if it's evaporating this traffic, where's it precipitating? And I also wanted to just give a little shout out to a guy called Pete Payne, who's involved in the MPIL campaign, who produced some of the data I'm going to use, and also found some of the information with MetroCount, and to Andrew Elson, who's a Times journalist, who got some really good quotes out of MetroCount. MetroCount are essentially the monopoly in terms of traffic counting technology. Other traffic counters are available, but most councils will tend to use MetroCount. They're kind of the default. And normally they're, in most circumstances, when used correctly, their counts are very accurate. But there's a particular case where that's not true, which I'll come on to. So going back in time, 25 years ago, what is now TfL and what is now DFT commissioned a report with a group of academics who use secondary data, so that's data collected by councils or other traffic authorities across Europe, to analyse what happened when you reduced highway capacity. And they did caveat this data and saying that it was rarely completely reliable. It was based on traffic counts of arbitrary, selected roads. It didn't always include all the places where traffic might have relocated or all the traffic where it might have reduced. Now, that data found that in 74% of cases, overall traffic around the scheme reduced. So that's the traffic where roads are reduced and also the traffic where it was displaced onto, so an overall reduction. However, in more cases, 85% of cases, traffic on alternative routes, you might know them as boundary roads, you might know them as sacrificial roads, actually increased. So why am I going back 25 years? Well, this report was actually used as the basis for all kind of traffic monitoring going forward. So in the olden days, people used to do traffic modelling, and if the model said it's going to go up by 30% on this other road, they would stop. Since this report, they decided that actually sometimes that doesn't happen, so let's suck it and see. And that's where you get the use of experimental traffic orders and such like. And so the main quote was that traffic does disappear in response reductions, but only to the extent it needs to do so. I'll explain a little bit more about that. So talked about precipitation. So the report found that there is no rule of thumb in terms of if you reduce road capacity, how much traffic might reduce overall. And they basically said it's completely independent on the cases. They found three kind of different situations where you got quite different results as a result of closing roads or reducing lanes. So one is that actually the amount of capacity didn't reduce, even though it looked like it did. For example, they might change light timings or other traffic management options, or there might be a new road built elsewhere, in which case the traffic simply finds a better route and you don't see any change, positive or negatively. Or it might be that the overall road network has adequate spare capacity, so there's capacity on the main roads, in which case the report found that traffic displaced. In fact, it said it reappeared on some of the road or at some other time. And in the one last case, this is the one everyone seems to focus on, if there's no adequate spare capacity, the traffic magically disappears. But it disappears due to changes in mode, destination, and trip frequency. You'll hear about changes in mode a lot because people talk about the switch to cycling, even though evidence suggests that road traffic tends to switch to public transport and public transport switch to cycling. But actually, that includes destination changes. So, for example, a bridge is closed, you might go across the next bridge, or you might stay on your own side of the river. That's a change in destination, and that would appear as evaporation or a reduction in traffic. So I want to show a more recent bit of data. So this is from Westminster's Active Travel Academy report into LTNs with the charity Possible. And the headline from that report was that LTN impacts on internal roads seems systemic and substantial, in other words, huge, but boundary road averages change little. So what they're saying is, when they've measured the traffic differences, we've seen a big decrease on LTN internal roads, and you've seen a very small increase on boundary roads. But actually, if you dive into the data and look at the median figures, the actual number of cars that internal roads saw reducing on average was about 332, and the increase on the boundary roads was 288. So it's pretty much the same figure, but one is seen as a substantial change, and one is seen as a little change. Why is that? Well, it's because boundary roads get almost 10 times more traffic. You might also hear some reports saying that there's not a statistical significant increase. So if 100% of traffic moved from the internal roads onto the boundary roads, because the boundary roads have so much more traffic, it is impossible to say statistically significantly that the traffic has moved, even though it has. It's just a mathematical quirk of the fact that you're going from a small thing to a big thing. So that's just a bit of background to say that even if the traffic is increasing by a large amount, it appears to be a small amount. And Ken's basically made a quote about how, oh, the traffic on those roads is already high. So on to the kind of matter at hand, really, which is let's talk about, which was the problem of counting slow traffic. Now, you may have seen the article in the Times on the right, and you may have heard about what happened with Enfield Council. This came up in a court case where it turns out that Enfield were using the figures that included 10 km/h traffic in their pre-scheme figures, but they excluded it in their post-scheme figures. So what Metrocount said is that the way it works, you've got two tubes going across the road, and your wheel hits one tube, then it hits the other tube. And it measures the time between the wheel hitting those two tubes to work out how many wheels the car's got, how fast it's going, and obviously how many vehicles are going past. In order to work that out, it has to work out the distance between the hits, to work out the speed, work out the distance between the axles. And so it's guessing whether it's one car with two axles going past or it's one lorry with four axles going past. And that all depends on the distance it thinks there is between these cars. So the actual counter itself, the thing that's sitting in the road, all that does is recording timestamps of the axle hits, the pulses when the wheel goes over the tube, and it records the millisecond when that happens. The software that groups those axle hits together using complex algorithms to work out what the vehicle types are, what the counts are, and what the speeds are. Now, the software includes an option to exclude traffic traveling below 10 km/h. And the reason they do that is to improve accuracy, because you get the problems of low speeds where it's not counting them correctly. And some councils basically fiddle with that setting. Now, when Enfield redid the analysis, because the raw data doesn't change, just the analysis, they've actually found that it increased the boundary road increase by a third. So the boundary road increase went from 6% to 8% on average. Now, they claim this was because of an automatic software update and nothing that they'd done, the contractor did. However, Metrocount said very explicitly it was a deliberate choice to change the default setting, noting that every single report produced by the software lists the parameters at the top, including speeds. So the idea that this was accidentally missed is a bit hard to believe, but we'll take their word for it. Now, the thing is, putting that traffic back, that 10 km/h traffic, doesn't actually solve the problem. It might increase the accuracy of the remaining results. However, it doesn't bring all the traffic back. So this is a quote from Metrocount. First of all, Metrocount say that their counters are only designed for use in free-flowing conditions. They don't work at very high speeds. They don't work at very slow speeds. And the accuracy, it kind of increases the slower the traffic. In particular, stop-start crawling traffic is worse. It's not just going slow, it's when it's stop-start. And the issue is the axle hits too far apart. So your first wheel hits it, 5 minutes pass as the traffic stops, your second wheel hits it, and it thinks, well, that's two single wheels. And what it does is it goes, I have no idea what that is. I can't work out what kind of vehicle that is because there's so far has passed between the first and second axle hitting. So it sticks it in a category, either a spurious data category or an unknown vehicle category, and that data is not included by default. And again, even if you do include it, it doesn't know what it is. All it knows is that there's an axle hit. It doesn't know whether it's a car or it's 2 cars or 1 car. So it just doesn't count it. And it might also end up attaching the axle hit to a vehicle in front or behind. So the front wheel of the car might think it's the last axle in a lorry behind it, which is a bit strange. So this guy, Pete Payne, he did some analysis. They did some independent traffic counts, and they looked at doing these manual counts on a busy road that had been counted with a metro counter, and they correlated the difference in the counts they found and the counts the council reported, and they correlated that against how many vehicles were traveling at less than 10 kilometers an hour. And as you can see on the graph top right, there's a very, very strong correlation. And so some analysis was done to work out, based on the axle lengths of cars, how much you could end up miscounting. And what was found was that even if in kind of very mild congestion, where you've got 10 car lengths between stopping and starting, you might miss 5% of the traffic at that peak time. But if you've got heavy traffic, where you've got literally 1 car between, which is exactly the kind of traffic we see on a lot of LTN boundary roads, then you could lose as much as 57% of traffic at peak times. So clearly that's not over the entire 24-hour period, but if an LTN is either increasing traffic so that the car lengths move together, or it's increasing the number of hours when a road is spent being congested, that's going to increase the amount of traffic that's reduced. So the kind of question really is, can traffic evaporate? Yes, it can evaporate. Of course, some people may switch modes. Of course, some people may choose different destinations, which are going to be undercounted or be on the screen lines. And some people might not choose to travel, or they might choose to batch their journeys. And people make all sorts of decisions. As they always say, traffic isn't like water. People can change their minds. However, it is very likely to be very overstated. Not just because of the fact that the traffic counts can't capture, people giving it an area wide berth. So, you don't just drive around LTN, you might drive several miles outside an LTN to avoid it. But also because of the flaws in pneumatic tube ATCs, the automatic traffic counters. It literally shows an increase in congestion appearing as a decrease in traffic flow. So again, with an LTN situation, when Anfield measured the change, it didn't impact the interior roads because the interior roads were not congested. There wasn't a lot of traffic below 10 kilometers an hour, but it did change the traffic on the boundary roads because they were congested. And of course, the congestion increases with all the LTN, which meant the reduction or shown reduction was even higher than it actually was. And again, that was just the ones that were counting. That doesn't include all the spurious data counts when the traffic is literally at a standstill. But even if we did track all the traffic, as I showed earlier, because it always looks like a small increase on a very busy road, apparently it's impossible, even with 100% placement, for an increase on a sacrificial road to be high enough for a council to consider it material. So it didn't matter whether it was 6% or 8% or even probably 30%. They're not really using the data anyway. It's all for the greater good. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't demand better data, and we shouldn't demand better ways of counting. And just to finish, there are some interesting new technologies appearing where there's camera-based counting, where it uses AI to recognize the images. Clearly, that technology is going to have its own flaws. It might be worse at high speeds, but early signs are it could be very accurate for counting congested traffic. So it's going to be interesting to see if we can start getting hold of some of these devices and doing our own counts. But hopefully that gives you a bit of an overview as to why we can't rely on ATC pneumatic counting, particularly where congestion will increase. And you must demand your council do more to analyse. That's it.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Paul. That was some very, very informative. There were some very informative pieces there, and it provided some brilliant insight. So thank you very much for your time this evening. Very much.